My name is Lisa Plumb, and I am a child abuse survivor. My earliest memory of abuse, I was 5. My parents divorced. I remember my mother had tried to kill herself. I didn't know that at the time. After she came back from treatment, she was a party mom, and she started having singles parties that attracted pedophiles. Some of the pedophiles that came to the parties befriended my mother and abused me and my siblings. So when my mom would prepare the house to have the parties, we were slaves, I guess. She would yell at us, scream at us, we got to clean, do this, do that, get things done. She would get very frantic and mean. But as soon as the doorbell rang and she opened the door, the different expressions and tones came on. You know, my brother nicknamed her Hollywood Mom, and everybody was welcome and we were all happy now. So when people started coming, it was kind of exciting, but we had to stay, behind our line and not interact until pedophile, which of course at the time I didn't really know, but invited us in. So yeah, let them come into the party. There was no particular red flag or feeling in my body at the time of concern. But later, this particular perpetrator was a handyman, and he involved himself in helping my mom around the house a lot. Again, looking back, he was mostly interested in me. I was probably in his age. I do remember being on my big wheel in the backyard. He came back to fix or look at our air conditioner, and just kind of getting a look from him that just was ominous. At the time, again, I didn't really have that language, but just saw him looking at me. My mom left us alone in the evenings a lot, and he would bring me gifts. He brought me crayons, a coloring book once, and then proceeded to molest me as I was coloring. My sister walked in and flipped out, got upset. What's going on? I didn't really understand what was going on or what was wrong or bad, but I definitely felt shame, like I did something. And another time he took me to ice cream alone. And instead of going to ice cream, he drove into a nearby field. He proceeded to also abuse me in that field. My sister must have, spoken to my mother and father about the abuse that she saw him doing, that I didn't know what to say or how to say or explain, and had him, my mother, and at the table, she had me come in and asked me what happened. And my mom said, "What happened?" I didn't have the words. Also, John, the molester, had threatened me that if I were to tell, my mother would die. That's the last time I remember seeing him in my life. And so I was 5 years old when my mother hooked up with this boyfriend, and he was a scary guy. I was very quiet around him and compliant because he lost his temper pretty easily. They started taking us to nudist camps, particularly one nudist camp, Glen Eden. He would explain to us why it's a good thing, and other people that don't do it, they don't understand. And then they continued the abuse from just being naked in front of each other, which at the nudist camp, there was also creepy old men around, or men, women too, I'm sure, but I just remember being there and groped by a couple of men as well. I avoided them, and other kids talked about them with us, oh, that's the doctor. That was his nickname, the one swimming in the pool. But back at home, my mother and her boyfriend would have sex in front of us as a sort of explanation, I guess, of what's going on. This is what your future holds. But he was also pushy and mean. And one day he told me to get a bath ready for him. So I did. He said, make it hot. I turned on the heat, and I'm just standing in the hallway trying to get this bath ready for him. And my brother bursts out of his room cussing or something. I don't really know what was going on, but this guy had no tolerance for that from my brother, the disrespect, abusers hate that. And so he picked up my brother by his ankles and started dunking his head in the toilet, which was terrifying and heartbreaking. I felt terrible for my brother. So my mom was always there, backing him up. I was on all sides being told it was okay. And then also my sister must have told him this other guy molested me, and she walked in on it. And one day he came over, we saw him on Sundays, and he said, "So I understand you were molested. Just don't make a big deal about it." So the first time I saw them have sex in front of me, I was in the house and I heard noises, and my mom called for me to come into the room, and it was dark, but the door was open, and I said, "What what's happening? I was scared because I had never seen anything like that. And it's intercourse happening in front of me, and I had no concept, and it looked like bad, like she was being hurt. And they said, sit down. And I sat down, and they said, watch. And I just said, are you okay? I did not understand until years later, it popped in my head like, oh my gosh, they were having sex in front of me. And it was very uncomfortable. Other molestation occurred too, where, the perpetrators were interested in giving me pleasure. When you sexualize children early and then you're abusive to them, they tend to continue that behavior. So my brother continued that behavior with me. Somehow got neighborhood boys involved. And so what happened till I was about 9 and my stepdad came in my life was there was periods of time where we'd be out playing hide and go seek or tag or just whatever, and it would be time to pants, Lisa. And so they would all zero in on me, chase me down. Usually I ended up in a room in the house and they would tear off my clothes, hysterically laughing, pry open my limbs, and okay, well, let's try this and put this there or that. And so that was an ongoing joke and behavior towards me in the neighborhood, and didn't matter what I wanted or didn't want. One day, I don't know exactly what had happened before, but my brother was violent with me, as was my sister, and I was the youngest. I was the youngest and smallest in the neighborhood at the time. And I was crying, going to my mom, and she said, here we go again, Sarah Bernhardt. And I remember looking up at her like, well, what do you mean? Who is Sarah Bernhardt? And she said, she's a famous actress. And so, of course, the message is I'm overreacting. I'm dramatic. But, this whole neighborhood situation was like a weird dynamic. There was a couple boys that lived down the street. They were brothers. They pulled me off of my bike before, came and dragged me out from my backyard and groped me, molested me. One time I was in their bedroom, hysterically crying, sitting on his lap, and the mother knocked on the door and came in and looked at them and said, is everything okay? And sees me crying. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. And then she closed the door and left. Other boys sometimes asked me to try to do sexual favors for them here and there. So it was like a violent, we go from play to it's time to pants Lisa to back to, okay, hide and go seek. I had a little friend at the time. He was the second oldest. We became boyfriend and girlfriend. It was like an appropriate relationship. He was around all of this, but he and I would pair off and go steal cigarettes and candy and stuff at the local stores and hide out in our fort. But my stepfather came around when I was about 9 years old, and he was a good guy. He really liked my mom. They ended up getting married. He was a merchant marine, so he was there half the time, but he would actually try to parent us. And he noticed that my brother was violent with me, and he said, told him such things like, boys don't hit girls. That's not okay. These behaviors aren't okay, or this is what you need to do instead. And besides the fact that he actually ended up putting a stop to that abuse, for my brother, which not only benefited me, but benefited my brother. My stepdad, Ray, was actually tender and kind to me. So one day my mom told me that, oh, hey, your sister met this couple, Don and Jody. They go to nudist camps too, and they want to take you to nudist camp. I said, well, I don't want to go. But at this time, I'm 11. We had stopped going when my mom's boyfriend, Larry, broke up with her, and I didn't want to go back. But my sister had met these people on a train. She went to visit her grandma in Indiana. They zeroed in on a young girl alone and found out that they all went to nudist camps before. And, oh, you have a little sister? I can only imagine what the conversation was. But I was told I'm going with them to the nudist camp. I said I didn't want to. Anyway, that didn't matter. And they showed up the first day I met them. We go to the nudist camp. So the thing about it was a man and a woman, and she was very outgoing, very charming, very friendly. And she was an athlete, and I love sports. And she's like, it's fine. It'll be fine. Let's go. We ran out to the truck and we get in, and there's a pack of Marlboro Reds on the dashboard. And she's like, you want a cigarette? I'd never smoked in front of adults before. I'm sitting between him and her. And so I, at the time, was like, okay, that's cool. I guess it's going to be all right, because I was a little smoker. And we get to the Glen Eden, the nudist camp, and they let us in. And it was the same rule. Clothing was not optional. And that weird, awkward, hesitation. Like, I didn't want to take my clothes off, but it became like, she's like, come on, it's no problem. Whoever can get it off first, it's like, I don't know. So that first night, what I remember is they had Atari at the time, was the new video game, the first video games, I think. And I was pretty excited about that. And they're like, here, have some. I could smoke what I wanted. She cooked dinner, taught me how to cook dinner, and we gave him the food, and I was like, okay, seems pretty cool. But that progressed quickly to sexual abuse with, philosophical interjections, people that aren't nudists, aren't as smart as people who are, they're not evolved. One of the ways that they normalized what they wanted to do with me was, one day I was alone with him. He had come and picked me up, and she was working, and we had gone shopping. We're in his truck, and he said, hey, your sister said that you want to have sex with me. And I'm 11, okay, and he's like 39, 40 years old, and I'm completely mortified, horrified. Don't know. I have no idea if she actually said that or what, but I was like, no, I don't. I'm sorry. I thought he was like, you kind of looking bad out there. I was thinking initially, like, he's going to help me, like, not come off like that or something. But then he said, no, it's okay. It's fine. And so I was even more horrified. And then my 11-year-old brain went to, oh no, I don't want Jody to be upset, because they're a couple, and I'm not trying to be involved in that or hurt anybody's feelings. So I said, please don't tell her. And finally he's like, okay, I won't. I'm thinking and hoping this just goes away. But when we go to pick her up, she gets in the car, and he's all, Lisa wants to have sex with me. She immediately says, oh yeah, that's fine. I didn't want to. They just go on about chatting about their day. And so then it became like a coercive, come on, you could watch first. You don't have to do anything. And this, whatever, just showing me and then holding me. Then he would hold me. And then it just progressed to more sex acts. One day, Don said to me, hey, Lisa, I want to take you to this photographer, see if you could be a model. And I was like, what? No, I can't be a model. Like, I felt like I was awful looking and just gross, and I just wasn't interested. And so the day came, and there was other girls around sometimes, and sometimes there wasn't. That day, there was other girls. He had me and them get in his truck, and we're on the way to the photographer. He became obsessed, or he was obsessed with a movie called Pretty Baby, starring Brooke Shields, and he had me watch it with him, with Jody and him, while he was touching me, and then also with just me and him over and over. So we're on the way to the photographer. Kind of heard a voice. I felt a voice. It said, memorize how to get there. And I kind of shook it off, but I felt it, but I didn't even know where I was. There was no way I could have told you how to get to their house or anything. I knew my little area of Riverside, but other than that, I never memorized any directions. So I just shook it off. I'm looking around, and then I felt it, heard it again. Lisa, memorize how to get there. And so I just felt like I should obey and do what it said. And so I'm looking out the window, and I see 7th Street, 14th Street. We pull into the parking lot of where the photographer's studio was, and I can still see it. I just kind of sealed it in my brain, didn't think about it anymore. And then, Jody lets us out, and it's like, okay, whoever's first, let's race or see who can get there first. And we pop up to the studio on the 2nd floor. We get in there, and this guy is sitting behind his desk, and there's a Rubik's Cube on the table. And I'm like, a Rubik's Cube? Can I play with your Rubik's Cube? And he just looks at me with like a very cold, unsettling look that caused me to just shut up and sit down. He didn't say anything. And then it's my turn, and it was full clothes, just a headshot, and we're done. We're out of there. So that was good. I was over. Later that week, I'm at school, and detectives come to my school. Basically, Don and Jody got busted. They're asking me questions, interviewing me, put me in a shelter home. I didn't really understand exactly what was going on, what had happened, why they got in trouble. But when I was at the shelter home, a social worker came and picked me up and took me to Orange County detectives, and they wanted to interview me because I was in Riverside County and a lot of the abuse happened in Orange County. So a detective started talking to me. It was just he and I in the room, and he said, hey, do you happen to know where this photographer is? Don and Jody said they don't know. I was like, before I had a chance to say, I memorized how to get there, he started telling me, like, I couldn't even really believe it at the time, that he was known for murdering children, and that he had killed a little girl and a little boy. And he gave me some details. I said, well, I memorized how to get there. And he said, you did? I said, yeah. He said, you could take me there now. I said, I could take you there. And we went right away, him, I, and another detective or something. And I did. I took them right to the studio. There was no answer. They knocked on the door. At this point, I'm thinking, I don't know. I have all kinds of thoughts, but I'm thinking, like, is this guy going to hurt me? He sees me, Don and Jody, like, I don't know. I'm in trouble. I don't know what's going on. But there was only a knock at the door, or they only knocked on the door. There was no answer. They said, thank you, and took me back. Never heard anything about that again until years later. The detective, that Riverside detective that befriended me, felt bad for me, told me my mother was the worst type of abuser, but that he's really sorry he had to put me back in my home anyway. He was kind to me in the shelter home, made sure I could play softball, took me out to dinner. I got in touch with him as an adult, and he said to me, I asked him about that, because all these years I was like, this just seems unbelievable, like kind of weird. But he's like, no, Lisa, I knew about the snuff filmmaker guy, but I didn't want to say anything to you at the time because you'd already been through so much. And so that was really validating that he knew. But also I told him, well, the other detectives told me. And by the way, I think I should have been told what happened. It was validating that he knew about that. For me personally, I had seen an editorial by Hal Fishman months later where he's a newscaster in Los Angeles, was talking about some victim because of their courage, this perpetrator, child molester ring, whatever, pedophile ring was busted. And I felt like that was kind of a message from God or, the universe saying, like, I did help. He is busted. I'm in 9th grade, playing volleyball. My mom, actually, we had a little bit of an improved relationship. And our long-term neighbor that lived behind us was this Italian lady, and she would always cook this pasta and share it with us. And we started playing Yahtzee with her, my mom and I. We would walk over. And anyway, her adult son moved back home after a divorce. And we all would just talk and smoke, drink coffee, whatever. He started asking me questions. Like, I guess they knew that I had been in a foster home over the summer. One day his mom flipped out, and she, instead of flipping out on him, she said I was seducing her son and told me to never come back. My mom actually got upset and stood up for me in that moment. I don't know, told her off, don't talk to my daughter that way. We walked home. Well, later that night, the older son, who's late 30s or so, comes over. I'm so sorry my mom said that. That was wrong. We can still be friends. I'll come over here, blah, blah, blah. One day we go for a drive, and he and my sister are like, hey, try this. And that was my introduction. I had other forms of and stuff before, but I'd never had. And they're like, it's great, this is how you do it, and when you're up all night, this is what you should do. And so I started taking. So he was still just a friend, and he's like, when you're up in the middle of the night and you're bored, you can just come over to my house. I'm like, well, your mom hates me. I can't just come over to your house. He's like, no, you can come over through my window and, we'll just play games. And so one night I went through his window, started playing games, and then he approached me, started kissing me. Okay. And it went from there. I, at the time, thinking, oh my gosh, he likes me. Like, he wants to be my boyfriend. and he was really cute. He was a popular guy, and I felt flattered, but also I was like, oh no, like this is not what I wanted. Nobody can find out. Everybody's going to think I'm. And so I told him, I said, nobody can find out. Like, I don't know that, this should happen. Like, we should do this. He's like, no problem. Like, it's okay. Nobody will know. Anyway, he was very similar to, the couple that abused me. It became about pictures and sex acts. And he would give me, and it became transactional, and it broke my heart. Like, I didn't like it. I didn't want that. I tried to get away from him, and I told him also, people, if they find these pictures, oh my gosh, I was kind of thinking about myself, like, I feel awful about these, and this is not good. And he's like, well, if you want to get rid of some old ones, then you can do some new ones. You do 5 new ones, I'll get rid of 10 old ones, and just crazy stuff like that. But I stopped interacting with him, but he had a picture of me. He was like, oh, you play volleyball. Let's take a picture of you in your volleyball uniform. And so that was like the first picture. And then they became, worse and worse, like pornographic. But I tried to go away from him. I stopped seeing him. He was like a stalker, tried to pursue me. This boyfriend I had at the time, his family were proclaimed Christians. Like, it was a big part of their life. They were very nice to me, and they must have known what was going on with us. He was very controlling as well, and his sister knew that I liked to play volleyball. Somehow we got talking and stuff, and she's like, you could come play with us at the church. Probably I was late 16 to 18 as I started basically converting, and that wasn't my plan. That's not how I saw things, but I started talking to them and praying with them and reading scriptures that kind of validated, like the 10 Commandments and stuff like that. I validated that I didn't want to be doing these things, but I keep getting told by everyone I'm around, it's good, it's fine, you should like it, it's, and I had concluded that when I'm a more enlightened person, I won't feel bad about these things. But my mind started reversing on that, like, oh no, it's actually, I was right in the first place to not want that. Like, it's hard to explain, but I started praying, and I started feeling guided, and I started hanging out with people that had a different lifestyle, that went to church, that played volleyball, that weren't drinking and doing and, trying to live a certain way. And that's what I started to do. I started to really resonate with that. And I got sober that way. Then I ended up meeting my husband at church. And then we ended up getting married a year or so later. And then I moved out of the house. I actually was living at home and got sober. It's its own miracle. So I got married young. I was married at 19. And then I had 3 children. And now today I'm 56. And what's happened over the course of the past 37 years is I did have interactions with the system where they asked me to testify, and it wasn't positive in a lot of ways. It was re-triggering, but I threw myself into therapy and kept trying to educate myself how to heal, because I realized after I became a mom especially, I have symptoms. What the heck? Like, I'm not doing so well. I don't feel so good. And so not only did I get into therapy, which at the time, trauma therapy wasn't a thing, so that was extra hard. Now, trauma therapy is a thing, and self-regulation. But I realized, okay, I want to be a therapist. I need to become a therapist. So over the years, I started taking 1 class at a time, because I also had a lot of anxiety and also mental block. Like, I pretty much failed out of junior high and high school, but I was able to get my diploma anyway. So if you know a survivor, we should assume that anybody can be a survivor. You just don't know. But if somebody has the courage to share with you, just listen and thank them for sharing. You don't have to really do much more. If you can offer to take them to therapy or, have dinner once a month or something, but just you don't have to fix it, but the fix is in the listening and just like, oh my gosh, that's so hard. You can tell them you don't know what to do or say, but you're grateful that they're your friend, and whatever you can do to support.